Global Eyes.
India and Turkey, who's playing the game best? I'm Shani Rosanas.
And I'm Waslat Hasrat Nazimi.
And welcome to another episode of Global Eyes.
India and Turkey, who's playing the game best? India and Turkey have become two of the most closely watched actors in today's shifting geopolitical landscape. Their relationship, often described as complex and sometimes uneasy, reflects how both countries are redefining their roles in a rapidly changing world. We chose to focus on India and Turkey relations because this quiet tension reveals far more about global politics than the headlines suggest.
And the dynamic between President Erdogan and Prime Minister Modi and the way both governments speak about strategic autonomy raises a broader question about how middle powers navigate this period of profound transition we are living in. And our guests agree that the international system is moving away from old patterns, yet they deeply disagree on whether Turkey or India, which one of them has adapted better and more effectively.
To understand these contrasting views, we spoke with Turkish analyst and professor of international relations Mehmet Özkan and former Indian ambassador Talmiz Ahmad.
Let's start, talking about India and Turkey, unpacking this relationship. For a long time, Turkey and India seem to be moving in separate spheres. There was not clear animosity. There was some respect, but there was not ever, there was a lot of potential, but not fully fulfilled. And this kind of changed. Recently, we see both of them trying to, vying for more global influence. And of course, we are seeing the whole global scene changing, and that gives them and their roles even more, potential leverage in the different spheres in Asia, but also beyond that.
I think everything would have been different if there wasn't one topic that they both disagreed on, which was Kashmir.
Many Indian colleagues, they say Erdogan always talk about the Kashmir issue. I did not take significance. Erdogan's speech on Kashmir, does that change anything on the ground? Nothing. So, Indians sometimes, Indian side, they try to put a condition that Turkey should not speak on Kashmir. We live in a global politics. Everybody speaks about each other. Many people speak about in Turkey's issues as well, from Cyprus to other issues. So that is as if India is putting a precondition. That's impossible. But some talking is not changing anything on the ground.
Even while he was in India, he made certain references to the issue of Jammu and Kashmir. And that signaled to India that the president was not interested in improving ties with India. We had very high expectations. India had contributed a lot of relief assistance during the earthquake in Turkey. And we were looking at a substantial strategic partnership.
All right. So, Waslat, you have spoken to Ahmad. Why does this moment specifically in Kashmir as an issue, why is it so important for India?
It's a very sensitive issue for India, and I think they expected more. So Turkey was aided by India during the earthquake, and which was a huge catastrophe for the whole country, for the whole nation. And I think they expected Turkey to be grateful in a way. And when they didn't, and they chose to speak about such a sensitive issue during a diplomatic visit, India was kind of appalled by it.
For the audacity to bring it up during a visit on Indian soil, that's also part of it, I guess.
Yes. So we have two interpretations of the same situation, and I think it really marks the beginning of the divergence between both countries, which I think is remarkable because everybody speaks about other topics and about each other. And I don't feel that India is as sensitive or has been as sensitive when it comes to other countries, when it comes to Saudi Arabia or other nations where similar issues were raised. Maybe not Kashmir, but similar issues. But I really wonder, why was India so upset when it came to Turkey? It's just really interesting for me.
Well, I think specifically it's the issue of Kashmir and the idea that, this is our issue, we will deal with it ourselves. But I also think, we're talking about the hyphenation of Turkey, Pakistan, and how India, Pakistan, and how India is trying to break that hyphen and try to stand for itself. But I think the elephant in the room is, of course, connected to Pakistan and to the way the Turkish-Pakistani relations are always at the background and sort of kind of shaping India's stand on Turkey just as well.
I think not only on Turkey, but every other foreign policy issue is always seen through the lens of India, Pakistan, right?
Yeah,
I think
correct.
we talked about this in another episode as well.
Yeah, correct. Let's see what Mehmet Özkan say about this topic as being a dominant factor for India in its foreign policy.
But the question here, what Turkey should do to please Indians? For example, should we cut relations with Pakistan? So, this is, for example, and what damage is Turkey doing to India or what type of, blockage is Turkey is putting on India in its relations with other countries or in any area? There is none. There is none. And also in India, there is a different perception. They think that Turkey and Pakistan relations is Erdogan and it's a political relations. It's not a political relations. It has deep-rooted relations during the Cold War. In both countries, we had at the same time military takeovers. It's a Cold War relations. I can see in Turkey, the more supportive relations are military in Turkey.
We're talking about how important Pakistan or relations with Pakistan for India when it's trying to map out its alliances.
Yeah.
And who's, my enemy's enemy is my friend and so on, or definitely my enemy's friend is definitely my enemy. So it seems when it comes to India, but we're looking at the Turkish perspective, as we've just heard. It's a bigger perception of power and alliances in the region, and there's a very clear targeted effort by Turkey to have an Asia policy that goes beyond Pakistan, also into Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia. And of course, when it comes to Turkey, that is the more immediate part, is Central Europe, which is also an important part, also connecting to Pakistan. And this is also something that we need to look at in the bigger perspective of the game that Turkey is trying to play.
Turkey has found the opportunity. Turkey is reaching out to Pakistan to obtain from Pakistan the very geopolitical values that were advantageous to the West till recently. So what you find is Turkey now looking at what, in terms of the Turkic civilization, the border with Central Asia, in terms of its outreach, Afghanistan. Look at the huge landmass of Afghanistan, which they are reaching out through Pakistan. It will happen. It's a slow process.
So for India, it touches directly, it is related to their national security, which is understandable. But when I was preparing for this episode, I kept thinking, why are these two countries so close, Turkey and Pakistan? Because Turkey is also very close to Afghanistan, which is which they don't see as a contradiction, but India, for example, does, which also really stood out to me. I really thought about it for a long time. And then when I spoke to Ahmad, he gave this, what he just said, he gave this very good explanation, which made sense. And then also Turkey and Pakistan have a very long tradition of military cooperation, which goes way back, which was also something that I didn't know, to be honest. So that made sense then to me.
But, Václav, there's another elephant in the room, and that is the Islam connection,
Yeah.
Turkey seeing itself as the leader of political Islam, Erdogan seeing himself as a greater protector of Muslims wherever they are. I don't think it happens to be that Turkey has tighter relations with Pakistan and Bangladesh or looking into Indonesia. We're talking about major Muslim countries in the region. Of course, it's a more natural alliance for Turkey. And of course, it's also where, the root of the suspicion on the Indian side lies. This is part of, the bigger strategy that Turkey is playing into. Also, when you see its alliances around the globe outside of Asia, into Africa, definitely in the Middle East, there is this, and this is, this deep-seated suspicion on the Indian side is very much connected to that. And I think in that aspect, when we're trying to talk about where this relationship is heading, this is never going to change, and this would always be something at the back. The question is, how big of a factor do these two countries let it be? And if we go back to Özkan, he's talking about Turkey actually not letting this element being so big in determining its policy.
Turkey does not have a Islamist foreign policy. Turkey have an Islam-sensitive foreign policy, which means Turkey is, yes, paying attention for the issues of the Muslims, wherever it is, but Turkey does not base its foreign policy on an Islamist base. Turkey has a rational foreign policy. Otherwise, for example, if you look at only if Turkey had an Islamist foreign policy, what Turkey has to do in Latin America, in many parts of Africa, or even look at the case in Ukraine and other countries. So that framing is not a correct framing.
So I think you can look at these things, but I think one thing that stands out is that Turkey actively defended and actively aided Pakistan during the war between both countries by sending military equipment and so on, right? And I don't think that you can overlook this part. You can. I would do the same if I were India.
Yeah, but Ahmad,
also China.
Yeah, but Özkan also is talking about India being very selective, sort of picking on Turkey. He also blames Turkey for India for Turkey bashing, because he says, rightfully so, that the major player is actually China when it comes to Pakistan.
Everybody knows that Turkey was the minor actor there. The major actor was China. I think everybody knows it very clearly. So, India has a selective approach. Wherever it fits in its own discourse, puts Turkey in that.
When you try to look at, in what kind of active steps India is taking in shaping its policy, and how it's, how Pakistan is always playing a role there, Özkan is trying to suggest that maybe the India policy is somewhat not up to date, somewhat also immature, and not really looking enough in a dry matter into what are the interests, what are our needs, and playing accordingly, sort of not letting emotion take over in a way.
Yeah. So let's see what Özkan has to say.
Strategic autonomy of Turkey has become much more mature than compared to India. So the fact Turkey now has a mature understanding in foreign relations. Turkey does not see anyone, doesn't classify the countries as enemy or friend.
So you can really see that these two positions illustrate the heart of the disagreement. On one side, you have Turkey, who say that the tension comes from historical filters, and then you have India, who looks at the tension from present-day view, right? So I think this really illustrates what the problem is, because Turkey disagrees with that. When I spoke to Ahmad, he really focused on the inspiration Pakistan and Pakistan's founding fathers got from the Ottoman Empire, from the Caliphate, and how they were really influenced by Turkey through that. And I don't think Turkey sees itself through this lens when it comes to India, even though at the same time they do have this urge or this sentiment of going back to the former glory they had.
Erdogan is a strategic thinker. He has a very shrewd understanding of history, civilization, and geopolitics. He changes his position, but that does not mean he's an idiot. He is a very shrewd thinker. In India, we don't go in for shrewd thinking. We don't go in for long-term thinking. We don't go in for vision. We are not vision people.
And what I really find surprising is how also India then goes and says, okay, if you do that, then I will be closer to Greece, or I will be closer to, Armenia.
Well, again, we're talking about how, India's foreign policy is always defined by Pakistan and the Pakistan relations. And of course, this is, I think, a clear example. It's not that India has very, very much of needs to be so close with Cyprus or Greece or Armenia, for example, as much as
they don't need to, right? They're not regionally close.
They're happy it can sort of show Turkey we also have some, games. We also have some plays we can play with you again, and it's clear that they understand exactly where the alliance lines fall. So in that aspect, I think we always try to analyze, how further ahead is India in the game, trying to understand, when it talks about strategic autonomy, in the sense that it seems like, this idea that in principle Modi would like to pursue is actually not being actively enough formed. But this is actually a case where I think we can actually see where India is actually very coldly analyzing the different players in the game and choosing to side with those that it thinks it can benefit from, and signaling very clearly to Turkey, we know what you're doing. We can play the same game
But
just
are
as
they
good.
actually benefiting from siding with Greece?
I mean, as long as they don't lose from it, I guess that's all they have left to do in that aspect. But I always feel like India is kind of coming up with a lot of makeshift solutions that, again, always come back as a reaction to what the other side is doing. I'm not sure that India is so strategically planned as we are seeing Erdogan, what he's been doing in the last 20 plus years, and his very wide outreaching, perception of defense and strategy all over, far beyond the Middle East and Europe, has made him a very much of an indispensable player. And the value that he can bring to so many key players in the global arena. If it's Europe, if it's the US, you see that the tightening alliances that give him so much leverage. He has been very smart and very strategic in how he's positioning Turkey in that game.
I agree. I mean, you can like him or not like him, but you really have to pay some respect when it comes to that. And I think that's what both experts also agreed on. Also, the Talmiz Ahmad, the Indian expert, because beneath strategic choices lies a deeper layer that shapes how both countries imagine themselves. So identity and civilizational memory play a larger role here than either side openly acknowledges. Let's see what Talmiz Ahmad had to say.
The West is in retreat. And each of these old civilizations believe that their moment of resurrecting themselves as power players on the world stage is slowly emerging, that the West is truly and objectively in decline. Now, coming to Ankara, the kind of role he has played overtly, military incursions into Iraq, military incursions into Syria, the outreach to Libya, the Turkish Navy in the East Mediterranean, militarily, support for Azerbaijan against Armenia, militarily, and then culturally, outreach to the Turkic states. You are looking at a combination of military force and civilizational force to constitute the basis for the revival of the Turkish glory. Please remember, something similar is happening in India as well. It is civilizational, political at home and civilized. It is not a revival of Islam, though. It is a revival of Hindu glory.
Well, Mehmet Özkan actually would not agree with that. Let's see what he had to say about that.
When I spoke to my Indian colleagues and my Indian friends, as I see, they still see Turkey as the leader of the Khilafah, as the leader of the Islamic world, as if Erdogan is the Islamist still. He continues Islamist politics, but anyone knows that. I mean, that is not the case, and I think those who follow Turkey very well, it's not the case. But Indians keep repeating those cliches.
He's basically was saying during our conversation also that he feels that India is putting what he calls mental obstacles, and because it's still driven by cliches and out-of-date perceptions of what drives Turkey. Basically, he feels that Turkey is being misunderstood by India, and that had India had a more instrumentalized version, of policies, of foreign policy, it would have been able to contain the idea that, you can be both friends with Pakistan and in India, it doesn't need to be either or. If we're looking at the bigger picture, then of course the fight for dominance and what we were talking about, the civilization, and these are old, both very old, ancient cultures that the current day leaders very much, thrive and connect their leadership and their politics today to the history. That's still a very big part of the power dynamics.
That's why it surprises me that Özkan was so much against it, because I think you can't deny that maybe Turkey doesn't want to be an Ottoman Empire again or become a caliphate again. But I do think that they have this sense of we were an empire once and we can go back to what we once were, to this glory that we used to have. And it's not just Turkey, it's other countries as well. India, I think, has a very similar sentiment. And I just stumbled upon a video a few days ago on Instagram where I saw a video where it came from Iran, actually. An Iranian artist created this video showing the Persian king back then who received a game by the Indian leader. I don't know, maybe a Maharaja or a king as well. And then they really celebrated it, both sides. And also when I read the comments, I saw how people were like, yeah, this is what we used to be. And I feel like but
it's not just a game. It's chess, basically.
It was chess, yes. Chatarang, yes, chess. And then the Persian king, they created backgammon and they sent it back to India. And it was like a little challenge that they had. And people loved this video. And I think it's not for no reason. I think it's because it really touches upon a deeper feeling and a deeper sentiment that people have. And when I read the comments, I could really feel that. Even though from the Indian side, many were like, yeah, this was the Persian Empire before Islam came to the Persian Empire and destroyed everything, which also said a lot about how Indians view Islam and how Indians view Muslims, which I think also really supports Özkan's view when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's no doubt. I wonder how much of that is also, going back to these, connecting today's politics to old-day glory. I mean, some of it, of course, is authentic in the sense that these cultures are very ancient, and the language and, the customs, the heritage, what we're seeing, it's rooted, in thousands of years of history. Yeah. But then at the same time, I feel like it's been instrumentalized in the last decades, sort of as a counter argument to colonial Western powers and the idea to bring forth the narrative of the global South and the non-aligned countries and those sorts of things, giving more presence and prominence to them, to their claims, to their history, and to whether
they blame them?
No, I don't think so. I'm always kind of wary when we instrumentalize things in a way that becomes a bit cynical, enhancing, hostilities instead of trying to build more trust and more cooperation. But there is no doubt that, the Western-centric view had tried for many years to erase that history, to erase that past, to erase the achievements of ancient cultures that were there long before. Yeah. The West had stumbled all over the world trying to, take ownership of it.
I think, yes. So there's this sense of empowerment and retaking and reclaiming what was once yours. But I agree with you, of course, you have to be careful so it doesn't go into the other extreme. But one thing I think is clear that both India and Turkey describe themselves as strategically autonomous, but they use the same term to mean very different things.
I have defended strategic autonomy. It is like non-alignment, in a negative sense, that I'm not going to join you. Please understand that I can't join you. I'm never going to join you. I like you, and you may like us. We have a lot to do together, but we don't ever expect us to become an ally. India cannot become an ally of anybody.
Turkey is trying to relocate itself in transforming global politics, economically and politically. That is the case. From Africa to Latin America, from Balkans to Middle East, everywhere. Turkey knows global politics is transforming very deeply, and very fast. And in that case, you cannot follow a narrow-based, identity-based foreign policy.
You know, I think when we're talking now about strategic autonomy, in a way, it almost feels like Turkey is winning while India is talking about the game. You know, Turkey is long there on the field.
Yes.
Erdogan having great achievements when Modi is still trying, it seems like on many fronts, still trying to figure out his new position as the dynamics are shifting. It's clear that India is not fully ready to all of these things happening, and it's still kind of taking its time figuring out its next plays and not fully, catching up with the game that is kind of ahead of it.
Yeah, I think that's also what Ahmad really agreed on, that he said to India is behind. It needs to change its strategy because what they're doing right now, it's not working.
So where is this all leading? What's the conclusion? Where does Ahmed stand about the future of these relationships?
He was not very optimistic, I have to say. He was more pragmatic or maybe even pessimistic, because he said, I wish India would change its strategy. I wish India would also see its responsibility when it comes to establishing security in the region, which he thought they're not doing. So I think, and also when it comes to Turkey, he was also not very hopeful that things might change.
The emerging of a new order, the countries engaging with each other in periods of camaraderie, that would be for the longer term. But we have a very long way to go. You mentioned that this would be a good time for middle powers to be talking to each other. The reason why we are not doing that is we are so deeply polarized amongst ourselves. All of us are insecure because we don't know what is going to happen to us tomorrow.
I think one of the main reasons is that India is accusing basically Turkey of promoting terror in the region.
Mm-hmm. That's something that the Turks have denied outright, and they said, well, if there were any claims, they had any evidence, they should have show it to the world and take us for as well. We don't have any interest in that. But again, I think it goes back to the deep suspicion connected to how Turkey sees Muslim. I mean, how Turkey is seen as a leader of the more of Islamic political Islam, and trying to connect some sort of an Islamic axis of influence. And I think this is where it all leads to. Özkan, however, was very optimistic about a chance for a breakthrough. But as he says it, it seems like mostly India needs to kind of grow up and try to see this in a more mature way, and think about, basically let's put it all on the table and discuss and see where it leads us.
The will is there on the both sides. I think both sides at track 2 level, they came to a conclusion that we should have a transactional relations. That's fine. But I think it will infiltrate. It will go through the upper level as well. That's not yet visible. That did not yield any concrete result yet. But I am very optimistic.
One thing is clear, India and Turkey are not adversaries, but they no longer see each other as neutral actors. Their evolving relationship reflects larger questions about identity, power, and the stories nations tell them about themselves.
And understanding these narratives helps us understanding the strategy that is shaping around it and what might come next. And we would like to ask you, what do you think? Is it that India is losing the game, or Turkey just more advanced and winning it? Tell us what you think.
This was Global Eyes. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Global Eyes, a new take on security policy by DW.